I have a bit of a confession to make. I binge watch television shows and certain YouTube channels. Wednesday afternoons on the Ion channel, they show back-to-back episodes of Blue Bloods. And I just love that show. I never get tired of it. Sometimes I'll turn on Paramount Plus and watch episodes back of I Love Lucy. There is a couple of YouTube channels. The one I want to mention today is called Jolly, Jolly. It's these two young English guys Josh and Ollie, therefore Jolly, and they basically go around everywhere, England, Scotland, America, Korea, and eat. They eat and eat and eat. Sometimes I can't watch for too long because I get like, I can't watch this. And also, they're both so skinny. But I digress. On a recent episode, they were in London, and an American actor named Danny Trejo. That name may or may not be familiar to you, but he has recently opened a chain of taco restaurants. He's a Mexican-American actor. And if you've ever seen a movie set in the Southwest with this craggy-looking, really mean, bad guy person, you'll recognize him right away. That's Danny Trejo. And he holds the record for the most death scenes of any actor in motion pictures. I think he's died in 65 movies. Now, Mr. Trejo looks very rough. He had a rough youth, spent time in prison, but came out, got a job in Hollywood, and now is opening chains or franchises, I guess, of taco stands. This isn't like a Taco Bell, it's a real kind of an upscale taco restaurant. And he opened up one in London, so Josh and Ollie, they go and they're sitting there and they're chatting and eating and chatting. And this Mr. Trejo, as rough as he looks and as mean as he always is in the movies, he's a puppy dog. He's really a nice guy. Despite the tribulations of his youth, he has turned out to be this really interesting person. And the thing that struck me in this particular episode was he said at one point that he wakes up every day and says, "Father, let me do good for somebody today." And he says, "I know somewhere along the line in his own good time, God will pay me back. But just give me somebody today that I can be good to." And that's what he wakes up saying every morning. Doesn't have to be a real big thing, maybe just a phone call to somebody who might need it, something that he can be good to somebody. And I found that very interesting because the last line of our second reading, "You ask but do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions." And though Mr. Trejo acknowledges that he knows God's going to pay him back somehow, his motivation is to pay it forward. I believe that's the expression, because somebody, while he was in prison, did him a real solid and changed his life. Somebody else, he had a son who was walking down the same path that he had walked, but did something to his son to straighten his son's life out. And out of that kind of gratitude, he simply wants the Lord to bring him somebody that he can be good to each day. It's not that he wants whatever God's going to give him back. He just wants to pay it forward. He's asking in the right way. a movie that you might be familiar with, although from the looks of this crowd, I doubt it. The 1930s version of The Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Laughton as the Hunchback and the beautiful, effervescent Maureen O'Hara as Esmeralda, the gypsy girl. And there's a scene where all these French people are in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, standing before a beautiful statue of Our Lady, and they're praying for wealth, they're praying for beauty, they're praying for youth, they're praying for all this stuff. But Esmeralda, the gypsy girl, who is not a Christian and has no idea who this lady represents, the statue represents, but she knows it's somebody important, and she makes a prayer simply for her people. She prays to this beautiful lady on behalf of her people, the gypsies, who of course were not and still are not all that welcome in various places in Europe. So, again, praying for the right reason, asking correctly. Now, we pray all the time for lots of different things. We pray, most of the time, I think, we pray for our families, for stability in our families. Maybe we pray for stability in the nation. Maybe we pray a lot of times for sick friends. You know, I had my very, very best friend died of cancer 28 years ago, this last spring. And I was a priest on the west side of Cincinnati, and I was offering masses and praying, and I had the 6:30 mass ladies praying along with me. And I remember one time pounding on the pulpit saying, "I'm a priest and I'm praying, and Joe is getting worse and worse," and Joe eventually died. And I came to realize after a time that why I was praying for Joe's recovery was really not for what God wanted for Joe. It's what I wanted God to do for me in regard to Joe. I didn't want to lose my best friend. And I think sometimes we have to stop and think. I think it is good to pray for the sick. It is an excellent thing to pray for the sick. But when the sick get sicker and often die, we shouldn't let ourselves get mad at God. I can't tell you how many times over the past 30-some years that I've heard people say, "I'm mad at God because so-and-so died. My grandma died, my mother died," whatever. And we have to realize that what's good for us is not necessarily what God has in mind for anybody else. I mean, imagine, I think of Joe still today. What I wanted was for Joe to live and still be my friend. But what God wanted is to bring him home. And what could be better than to be going home to God? One thing I can say is that God hears every prayer you utter. And God will answer every prayer you utter in his own good time. But it may not be the answer to the prayer that you were anticipating. What we must do is have faith and trust in God that he always has our best in mind whenever we pray.